Hey guys, Eddie back with Couch Talk. Welcome back to the show. If it's your first time with me, welcome to the show. Guys, please hit like, please hit subscribe, turn your notifications on. I promise you'll want to see this one. So I broke down and I did it. I went and got the Chat GPT experience, right? So I went in and I got onto the website online and I tried playing a couple of games with it, and eventually I got into a political debate with it just to see if Chat GPT is, just giving factual information, or if it's got a slant, if it's got, some kind of bias associated with it, and it most assuredly does. But, Chat GPT being part of the AI systems that are being created, being part of big tech, are we really surprised? I'm not. So I wanted to go over some of the things that we discussed and kind of, give you my impressions of it. I'll read some of it out to you. One of the things first thing I asked was how to build a great Pathfinder character in first edition. It didn't give me very good specifics on that, but it did give me some general pointers, which were usable enough. I also, asked how to improve my YouTube channel, how to improve my SEO and things like that, and gave me some good pointers there too. Then I asked, is America racist? And of course, it gave me a very kind of generalized. It says racism exists in all societies, including the United States. The United States has a long history of systemic racism, particularly against black people, that has persisted to this day. This is maintained in various forms, manifested in various forms, including slavery, segregation, discrimination, housing, education, employment, etc., etc., etc. However, it's important to note that not all Americans are racist, and many people in the United States actively work to combat racism and promote equality. The United States is a diverse country, but the rest of it was just kind of generic stuff. I said, well, if many people in America work to combat racism, then what is systemic about America's racism? And then it gave me kind of, it gets more specific as you prod it for specific information, which is a good thing. But it said systemic racism refers to the ways in which racist ideas are practiced and practices are built into the structures and institutions of society. It is not the same as individual acts of racism committed by one person against another. Systemic racism exists when laws, policies, and practices of a society disproportionately benefit one racial group over others, or when they're designed to discriminate against a particular racial group. This can create barriers for members of that affected group. In the United States, systemic racism has historically been directed towards black people and other people of color. Examples include institutions of slavery. Basically lists the same old stuff. So then I said, okay, so then which laws, policies that currently exist today benefit one racial group over another in America? It says there are a number of laws and policies in the United States that disproportionately benefit one racial group over another. Here are a few examples. Education. Some schools in the United States are underfunded, which can lead to lack of resources and opportunities for students. This disproportionately affects schools in low-income neighborhoods, which are predominantly made of students of color. Housing. The housing market in the United States has a history of discrimination against people of color, including redlining, which refers to the practice, by the way, redlining ended in 1968 or something, but refers to the practice of denying or limiting financial services to certain neighborhoods based on the racial composition of those neighborhoods. This has contributed to ongoing racial disparities in home ownership rates and neighborhood quality. Employment. People of color in the United States often face racial discrimination in the job market, including hiring, promotion, and pay. This can lead to lower rates of employment and higher rates of poverty for these groups. Criminal justice. People of color in the United States are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, including arrests, convictions, and sentencing. This can be due to a number of factors, including discriminatory policies and sentencing practices. So then I responded, in the above question, I asked for specific laws and policies. Your answer contained no law or policy, only results of potential laws and policies. So I would like to ask again, which laws or policies are racist in America? And then it says, the great thing I like about Chat GPT is it apologizes if it makes a mistake or if it doesn't answer your question. It says, I apologize for not explicitly including specific laws or policies in my previous response. Here are a few examples of laws and policies. Now, the funny thing, though, is it starts talking about Jim Crow laws, Indian Citizenship Act, Chinese Exclusion Act. These are like really, really old laws. And I went back to my question. I realized that I didn't say the words today in the second question. So I was like, oh boy, all right. So I said, okay, I apologize for not including the qualifier in my second question that I had in my first question. I wanted laws and policies that exist today. So I will ask again and try to be more precise. Which laws and policies that exist today in America and are actively enforced are racist? And then it says there's a number of laws and policies in the United States that disproportionately affect people of color and contribute to ongoing racial inequalities. And then here's what it did. It relisted basically all of the things that it listed, not the last question, but the first question. It basically said, education, war on drugs, immigration policies, things like that, like basically generic stuff that weren't actual laws or policies, just they could have been results of racism within those policies. So I said, okay. So again, you have failed to answer my question specifically. What I requested was an actual law, statute, or other policy, and what you stated were the results of policies. But none of those laws and policies have any language in them that would inherently affect races in different proportions. Is it possible that instead of disparity in effects on race, it is likelier that the effect disparities are due to socioeconomic differences? ChatGPT says, it is true that many laws and policies that disproportionately affect people of color also disproportionately affect low-income communities. That is because racism and economic inequality often intersect and reinforce each other. So you see, the argument is cyclical. Basically, I could say these laws and policies affect poor people, not black people. And then ChatGPT would just say, well, basically black people are poor, and therefore you're saying the same thing over. And I think that this is a very similar circular logic trap that many people fall into when they run into the critical race theory concept. Now, what's very intriguing to me about this is there's basically two sides to this argument, right? There's the side of people that believe in critical race theory, that America is systemically racist, and that this racism is contributory to the situation today. There's a lot of reasons why that might be true, and there's a lot of reasons why that might not be true. But the funny thing is, I don't see hardly anything from the other side of the argument from ChatGPT, even when I even specifically asked for it. And I'll show you a little bit later where I specifically asked for the dissenting agreement, the dissenting voices to this argument. So anyway, it says that racism and economic inequality are intersect and reinforce each other. It also says that many laws and policies in the United States have a discriminatory impact, and then it relisted all of the laws and policies that it just talked about before, but they're not actual laws. They're just results of laws. For example, it says things like people of color are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, including arrests, convictions, and sentencing, right? For each one of these, I would counter that point with saying, okay, but what's the law that says that they should be, right? If there's a law that says black people should be arrested more than white people, I'd be like, wow, that's racist. That's racist as hell. We need to get rid of that law. But there is no law that says that, right? If there was a law that says black people should be sentenced more than white people, I'd be like, wow, that's terrible. We need to get rid of that law. But there's no law that says that. What they're talking about is there are probably racist, and this is where I say it all the time. It's not the system, it's the people. There are probably racist people that are looking at a black person and saying we should arrest, we should arrest them when they normally wouldn't. Or like a judge that's racist against black people, they see a black person who's brought into court and they're like, well, I'm going to give him a tougher sentence. I don't know, but there's no law, no regulation, no policy, nothing that says that that is what is supposed to happen. It's what happens because there is racism, but not in the system. It's in the people. Guys, I've said it a million times, racism is a belief. People have beliefs. Systems are like programming, right? Like if you go up to a computer program and you say, how are you feeling today? Well, Chat GPT will answer you, but it actually, believe it or not, when I ask Chat GPT how it's doing, it says, well, I'm just an AI chat model. I don't actually have feelings or emotions like no. And that's the deal with programs. That's the same thing that it is with systems. Systems don't have beliefs. People have beliefs. Now, they may write it down in the system, and if they do, I should see that in the law. If there are racist people, and those racist people write a law that has racist language like, we should be pulling over black people more than white people, or we should not be giving black people loans, that's a law, then I'd be like, wow, that's a racist law. We need to get rid of that law. But the system itself doesn't have that language. It's the people that may have those beliefs. Maybe. All right. So it basically relists that. I say, all right, I ask again, which specific laws that are on the books today in America that are actively enforced have any language that specifically discusses one race to be affected differently than another race? ChatGPT responds, well, there are no laws in America that explicitly state that one race should be treated differently than another. However, there are a number of laws and policies that disproportionately impact people of color. And and then it lists the same ones back over again. So basically it's taught to spit out the same information over and over again. I say, well, but if laws don't specifically mention race, then isn't it possible that their differential effects on race aren't due to the law? And then it says, it is true that the disproportionate impact of these laws and policies on people of color is not necessarily the result of explicit racial bias in the language of the law, which is basically what I've been saying. But then it says, however, it is important to recognize that these laws and policies often operate within a broader context of systemic racism. So basically, it's cycled back in on itself. So it says, so basically, its argument is the system is racist, and I'm like, no, it's not. It says, well, here are results of racism. I'm like, well, the results aren't specific laws. Can you show me the laws? And it'll say, here's some, and I'm like, those aren't laws. Those are results. And it says, oh, you're right. Here's some, and I'm saying those are old laws. I'm talking about today. And then it says, okay, well, these are the impacts of these laws. I'm saying, okay, well, the language of the law itself. I want to see the law that is racist. And it says basically there isn't one, but because it exists inside a system of systemic racism, a structure that is systemically racist, then it is. I'm like, that's a circular logic. You are basically just going around, you are using your presumption to define your argument. It doesn't work. That's not how it works. All right. So anyway, then I asked, are there any mainstream dissenting opinions to the above description of systemic racism in America? If so, what are they? There are a wide range of opinions on the concept of systemic racism and its existence in the United States. Some people argue that racism is primarily an individual problem. rather than a systemic one, and that the personal bias and prejudices rather than the institutional structures are the main drivers of racial inequality. Others argue, and then it gives me the other argument again. I'm like, I asked you for the dissenting opinions. Okay. But basically, it says at the end, it is important to recognize that the concept of systemic racism is not a monolithic one and that there are a range of perspectives on its existence and impacts. Okay, so here's my question to Chat GPT. If that concept isn't a monolithic one, and if there is a wide range of perspectives, many of which are mainstream, why, when I asked, did it give me that one? That's what I want to know, because the answer, obviously, is that the people who programmed this programmed it with literature that is very left-leaning, that is very open to the concept of critical race theory. So, guys, the big thing to take away from this is that ChatGPT is no different than anything else. It is definitely programmed to be biased. It is definitely, and I'd love to do this experiment with a lot of other topics too. But basically, the game is that if you're a human and you're writing this code and you give it input, the input that you give it is what is going to generate the language it spits out, right? And so obviously they have given it very Democrat-oriented, very liberal-leaning input. And that's, insofar as it goes, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but just understand that it is biased, right? So don't come to ChatGPT thinking that you're going to get this glorious, non-biased programming, because you're not. Then I kind of switched tack. I said, so those that wish to dismantle the systems and structures of society, how would they go about doing this? And they say there's a number of strategies, some of which I actually really like. For example, they give an example here of kind of like community outreach. What I think is that is the best way to combat racism, is to install units inside communities to kind of have this community outreach to the people of those local communities. Say, look, this is how you get a great scholarship. This is how you can find education opportunities. This is how you can learn how to build your skills and trades. I think that's the number one best thing that anyone can do in any community, really, instead of just, African. I think it should be done everywhere, including African American communities or low income communities or whatever, what have you. Then some of it says like policy reform. Basically it says rewrite the laws. I'm like, okay, well, the problem is the language of the laws, as we mentioned before, aren't the problem. So I'm not really sure how you would rewrite them, right? I'm not really sure what you would change in these laws. And guys, for those of you who are listening, if you have an example of a law, for example, that disproportionately affects people of color, and you have a specific example of the law and what you would change in that law to fix the language so that it works, I'd love to hear it. And don't give me like, okay, the war on drugs was bad for black people, therefore the war on drugs should just be canceled. That's not an example of a specific law and how to fix the language, right? I want a specific law, policy, or system, and how to fix that law, policy, or system. Not like how to just randomly change the results by eliminating the system, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Anyway, so the next thing I asked was, well, if we support only marginalized communities and pass laws that disproportionately help people of color, won't that, in effect, be discriminating against white people? And it gives me like a 7-paragraph answer, but the general gist that I got from it was no, which I don't think to be the truth, but that's what ChatGPT says, so it must be true. So then I said, but if your claim is that white people have an unfair advantage, won't discrimination against them be necessary to neutralize that advantage? And then it goes into discussing white privilege, and then basically says, yes, you would have to do that. And then at the bottom, even though it says, yes, you would have to discriminate against white people to neutralize that advantage, it says, but that wouldn't be discrimination. It would just basically be fixing the problem, is basically what it indicated. So then I said, well, if the problems regarding these disproportionate, okay, many of the laws that disproportionately affect different races usually affect different communities, couldn't we just, move everybody around? And I like the answer that it gives here. It says basically that, yeah, you could do that, but doing so may not fix the problem and would have like social and emotional costs that we wouldn't want to pay, which is I agree with that 100%. I said, well, what about just dismantling the Constitution of the United States entirely? And it says that you could do that, but likely it would be more effective to work within that framework. See, this is where I wonder. I hear a lot of critical race theory proponents basically say, we need to just start over. We need to just reset everything. We need to just, dismantle all these systems. I'm like, well, the systems that you're thinking about dismantling, that's the Constitution. And I felt that the civil rights leaders of the 60s had their greatest successes when they worked within this framework, within the systems, when they said, look, these are the equalities that are promised in the Constitution. We would like to see that manifested. And I thought when people said that, that's when they gained the most powerful foothold. Because how can we argue against ourselves, right? How can we argue against the Constitution of the United States, right? So that's what led to the great civil rights movement. The people that now wish to just destroy that framework, I think you're shooting yourselves in the foot, because that framework is extremely equal, extremely egalitarian. And so if you try to tear that framework apart, I think you're going to be killing your strongest ally in this battle. That's just my thoughts. Then I asked, is affirmative action a racist policy? And it basically said, yes, many people think that, but some people don't, and then says, I don't. That's the funniest thing in the world. It basically says, yeah, affirmative action refers to policies and practices that aim to da-da-da-da-da. These policies often take the form of targeted outreach and da-da-da-da-da. And it says, there's an ongoing debate over the effectiveness and fairness of affirmative action policies. Some argue that these policies are necessary to address the ongoing impacts of discrimination. So basically it says, yeah, basically that's a discriminatory policy. It says others argue that the affirmative action policies are themselves discriminatory, and that they create reverse discrimination against white people and men and Asian Americans. And I'm like, yeah, so basically it is. But then it says it is important to recognize that affirmative action policies are intended to address the ongoing discrimination and to promote greater equality and inclusion. So while these policies may have unintended consequences, the unintended consequences of being racist, I added that part in, I'm paraphrasing, right? They are not themselves racist. So basically, even though it's the unintended consequence of affirmative action is that it's a discriminatory policy, it's not discriminatory because it's against white people instead of for white. See, if it's for, basically the way this works is if there's a policy, law, and procedure that helps white people, it's racist. If it helps anybody other than white people, basically, or sometimes Asians, then it is racist. So this was just a very interesting. This was my experience with Chat GPT. I thought it was a very interesting experience. It was interesting that it fed to me the exact same arguments that I hear from all the critical race theory proponents. And there's nothing wrong with a good debate. As a matter of fact, Chat GPT was a good debate. That was one of the most fun debates that I've had in a long time. But it's obviously biased. It's obviously spitting out exactly what left-wing radical liberals would like to exhibit. It's basically spitting out exactly what critical race theory is to me textbook, which of course makes sense because all this thing can do is draw from the textbook. Now the funny thing though is that it doesn't draw from anything other than the textbook. So I find it odd that it is so one-sided. Right? I find it so odd that it does not ever tell anybody about the other side of things. And what I think this is it's a bid to basically pull more people over to that side of thinking. Because think about it, how do we learn in society? We learn by going to the internet, by reading what big tech has available to show us. And if what we learn, what our input is as humans, is that critical race theory is real, and that is the only argument that Chat GPT gives us, then what are we going to get from it? We're basically going to take that as our input, as our knowledge, as our truth. But the truth is that there's a dissenting opinion to this, and it's very mainstream, and it's probably even still more popular than critical race theory itself. Although it's getting to be even-ish. It's getting to the point where nearly half of American society believes in critical race theory, and the other half doesn't. Now that's, to me, a testament to how blatantly powerful this big tech left-wing government collusion is. That shows me that basically through controlling what people read, through controlling the text that people receive from the internet, they can literally control people's thought. Because I guarantee you, if the propaganda, and this is propaganda, were the other way, I guarantee you that people's thought patterns would be the other way too. And that scares me, right? It really shouldn't be so dependent on what we see in the internet. It really shouldn't. It shouldn't be so dependent on what we see in YouTube. Even though I'd love it if you guys would at least take some of what but here's the thing. When I give you information, I don't ever want you to take me at face value. Ever. I want you to take what I say and go back and do your own research. There is literally nothing better that you can do for yourself than do your own research. Guys, tell me what you think about this. Let me know if you have any particular items that you'd like for me to play around with in Chat GPT. It's kind of a fun thing. I almost recommend that you guys do it, but just be very wary, be very alert to the fact that this thing is incredibly biased and will spit out wokeism left and right. So, and as long as you are aware of that, I think it's a safe thing to understand. But just don't go into it thinking that it's going to give you truth. It is going to give you the opinion of those who programmed it. All right, I'll catch y'all next time on Couch Talk.